Hey guys, what is up? Niad here with Film Comics Explained. We are back for the final chapter of Aliens Fire and Stone. There is a short epilogue titled Aliens Field Report that I will publish tomorrow before we get into the remaining issues of Fire and Stone, starting of course with Aliens vs Predator and concluding with Predator. When we left, the camp had been annihilated by xenomorphs. Cale had inadvertently brought the xenomorphs back to the camp with him. We also noticed that he had undergone a mutation due to his DNA mixing with the accelerant. Russell is now the only person that is left on LV-223. We pick up with Russell moving through the jungle. He's telling the rover that he believes he has finally figured where it came from, as he stumbles upon the wreckage of another ship from Earth. This, of course, is the ship Prometheus, which carried David, Shaw, and Vickers, among others. We know that the Prometheus crashed into the engineer's ship to prevent it from heading to Earth. Russell points out that the wreck must have been bad, but he managed to find some usable parts. It's been over 4 months since their arrival onto LV-223 via the Onager. Russell is in his cave attempting to make a pressurized suit to explore the jungle. What he wants to do is explore the unchanged surface on the other side to determine whether the accelerant was originally an aspect of the terraforming, or whether it was introduced later. It's good to see that he's keeping himself busy. Personally, I'd lose my mind if I was the only person left. Russell, however, is not altogether there, as we see him annoyed at Rover for ignoring his question. As the days continue, Russell is finding it more and more difficult to find fruit that isn't tainted with the black goo. He's about to say that he might eventually have to eat tainted food before he is cut off by something that he can see on the ground. Upon closer inspection, he realizes it was Standish's diary. He's glad to have found something to write his thoughts in, and formulates a plan to create a pen. He also notes it would be a good idea to read what Standish wrote first, as it'll almost be like having someone there beside him, other than Rover to talk to. It's at that moment that he hears a hiss behind him. What he then sees is Cale approaching from a branch of a tree. Russell was unaware that Cale had undergone a mutation, and is very surprised to see him this way. Cale jumps at him. Russell immediately drops his basket and starts to run towards higher ground. He slips a diary into the side of his pants as he makes his dash. Cale is right there behind him. As Russell is climbing, he estimates he will not make it, judging by the speed Cale was travelling, but is surprised by what he sees below. 5 xenomorphs are closing in on Cale. As one jumps at him, Cale punches it back before running off into the distance. The accelerant seems to have changed his physical and physiological composition, as we can see he's exhibiting superhuman strength and speed. Russell is very surprised to see this. He's essentially trying to understand what happened to Cale and how he managed to stay alive for so long. He notes that although Louise fused with an alien, it has had a different effect on Cale, who has instead begun to change into something like them. We can see that although he now resembled the aliens, they did not get along. What's even more confusing to Russell is the fact that the aliens didn't chase him up the mountain. He starts to question whether the mountain's continuous growth had anything to do with him being protected here. Russell's curiosity gets the better of him as he goes out searching for answers. He returns to the alien ship he had discovered a few months back. He's beginning to see the accelerant as an equivalent to DNA, noting its ability to change things by borrowing genetic material from multiple things. He surmises that the accelerant may have been designed to force mutations and speed up evolution. He begins to see it as a type of technology that has made Cale more fit to survive in this environment than he had before. This is similar to our discussion in the Invincible Iron Man, where we discovered the Extremis serum was like a technology, and that it enhanced human abilities. Russell moves towards the hypersleep chambers of one of the engineers and says he wishes he could wake one up and talk to them to get more information. He makes a joke to the sleeping engineer, saying that he had forgot to let the front desk know that he will be needing a wake-up call. We then begin to see him lose his mind as he slams his hand on the chamber, yelling at him to wake up, that he'd slept long enough. He then calmly looks over at Rover before saying it'd be nice to have someone new to talk to. He tells the Rover not to take it personally as he walks out. What we see though, is that the chamber is beginning to emit a noise. Another month has now passed and we can see Russell doing experiments on live creatures. He begins to understand that the goo can't be naturally occurring as it affects anything organic and resequences its genes somehow, confirming that it must be a kind of technology. He has noted that in some cases, like Kale, it seemed to improve an organism's ability to survive. He has also noted that it can also accelerate healing. It's here that we see Russell start to hypothesize a way to use it medicinally without the mutations to treat genetic disorders and cancers, but confirms that it can't simply be injected into a person. He says that you will need to filter it through something with a similar morphology, like an android or construct. This is essentially the research and theory that led Francis to inject Eldon and basically spell disaster for everyone in the Prometheus comics who will land on this moon in some years to come. We see Russell is getting overexcited about the possibilities and gets a headache. He informs us that he is finding it harder and harder to focus, like the wiring of his thoughts have changed. He admits that although he hasn't come into direct contact with the goo, it's quite possible that he might have breathed in trace amounts. We can see the whole cave is now littered with his research. He tells us that he is sure he can figure it all out if he had enough time to work on it. As Russell is sleeping, he's woken up by a terrible headache and begins to scream in agony. This is a combination of things. He's dehydrated, malnutritioned, alone and going crazy here. We will also find out there is something more sinister here. He turns to the rover and begs it to help him. Russell then comes up with an ingenious plan to reprogram the rover. He tells us that it was designed to scan environments and that with a little tweaking it would be able to scan him. After it has done so, he discovers that he has some kind of tumour in his brain. At the same time, the rover then begins to ping. Russell analyzes the rover to discover it is picking up some kind of signal. It appears to be human in origin, but is mysteriously coming from beneath the mountain. He asks what the hell is down there, questioning whether the mountain ate somebody, and whether it will eat him. A few more days have passed, and Russell has finished burying all the members of the camp that he could find. This is a beautiful sign for us that his humanity is still intact. He begins to talk to Genevieve's tombstone, telling her the things he has discovered have been amazing. At that moment, he has another terrible headache. At the same time, he is besieged by Kale. Kale appears a few feet away from him and is hissing. Russell asks Kale if there is anything left of him in there, of the man that he once knew. Kale responds by lunging at him, confirming that there was nothing left of Kale. Russell avoids the attack and scrambles to pick up one of the crosses. He hits Kale across the head with it, which does nothing. Kale then swings and takes a chunk out of Russell's stomach. It's at this point that Russell then tells Kale not to make him do it, before sticking the spear through the bottom of Kale's jaw, impaling him. Russell hears another sound behind him. What we then see is a few aliens emerging from the clearing, heading towards Russell. He is freaking out, as he knows he is too far away from the protection of the mysterious mountain. He begins to sprint away, as he begs the aliens not to attack him. They are closing in on him quick. They are almost upon him as we see Russell trip over a rock and fall into the ground in front of a pool of accelerant. While all of this is happening, we can see Russell going over what he has learned so far. He says that he is sure the goo acted as an accelerant. In some cases, it improved an organism's ability to survive. He also noted that it didn't only accelerate evolution, but it was also able to accelerate healing. He concludes that it can't be injected directly, as you would just end up mutated, as we see the aliens closing in on him. He turns around to see the accelerant and asks whether it would change him enough to survive, like it did with Kale. He asks if he would even remember if he were to succeed, as we see him reach for the accelerant with his left hand. We hear a loud screech before we reach the end of Aliens Fire and Stone. What an incredibly bumpy ride we've travelled to get here. We can see the foundations of what happens in the Prometheus comics. There is also a short epilogue to this called Aliens Field Report, which I will publish tomorrow, before we continue the Fire and Stone anthology and see what happens to Galgo, Higgins, Eldon, Francis, and the others. If you enjoyed this video and this series, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay up to date on all my content. I'm Nihat with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.